Hey, Kris, do you have any milk?
Yeah.
No, Kris, wait! Deltarune is a game filled to the brim with tons of content. There are puzzles, battles, amazing character writing, really funny jokes, and also just genuinely epic moments. But truth be told, I am not a reviewer, and the video's essay is something I barely have any experience with. But this is something I must do. It is my calling. Toby Fox and his crew made a game with so many vibes that it's honestly really hard for me to tell you what exactly my favorite moment so far is. But I can tell you that I've always gravitated more towards the quieter moments that allow the characters to breathe and let you see the relationship between them grow as they, and in turn, you, the player, get to know them better. The hometown segments always come to mind first when I think about this, as well as several interactions in Chapter 2 with Susie and Noelle, Susie and Ralsei, and the whole bunch of Kris and Susie moments all over the game. But there is one scene that really stands out in my mind. This moment in Chapter 4. This scene is so weird to me because it hit me in a way that I genuinely was not prepared for, and it made me cry. Video games don't make me cry. This is the second time that I've ever cried to a game, and it was on camera, no less. I've never done that. And what confuses me the most is that this chapter, hell, all of Deltarune, is filled with emotional moments that would make so much more sense to cry to. But this was it. I didn't cry to this, or this, but this. Yeah, these are really well-crafted emotional moments on their own, and they did still evoke emotional reactions out of me, but never strong enough to the point of tears. But after sitting down with this scene for Jesus, over 2 months, I finally have the answer. But before I can talk about this scene and why it works so well, we need to discuss some of the stuff leading up to this point because those moments are truly what matter. More accurately, I'm gonna break down the character arcs of the Fruity Gang, of the Fun Gang, so that way we can get a deeper understanding of why this scene works so well. At the start of Chapter 1, when we first meet Susie, she is incredibly reserved and hides behind blatant intimidation tactics and just straight up bullying. Something that she obviously does due to many different factors, including issues regarding self-worth, insecurities, and situations at home where she feels she isn't in control. We see several hints of that with Susie as the game goes on, and we get to know her better as a character. She battles loneliness, isolation, and shows clear signs of struggles at home with her behavior in Toriel's house at the end of Chapter 2, where she gets a culture shock of how cozy Kris's home is and how Toriel acts in it. We can also tell because of her clear avoidance of situations like the one at the end of Chapter 4, where when she originally plans to spend the night over at Kris's house, instead quickly jump ship after seeing Toriel because she clearly does not feel comfortable being in a house with an adult who is very much not sober. But getting back on track, as Chapter 1 goes on, she warms up to the other characters a little bit. Even in retrospect, at the beginning when she's being a total asshole, she drops some foreshadowing, telling Kris that they have a good mother. Something we learn more about in Chapter 4 when she tells Kris about the time Toriel looked after her and took her to QC's diner. As Chapter 1 goes on, Susie meets Lancer, someone who she connects with, because Susie and Lancer have a lot in common. Lancer is seen as obnoxious, and frankly nobody really wants to deal with him, something Susie could relate a lot to, feeling like an outcast in the light world. He compliments Susie. He says she's cool, which is something Susie doesn't get ever, and that's why she takes such a liking to him. She probably sees a lot of herself in him as well, as they're both essentially just rejects of their own respective worlds. And like, who doesn't like Lancer? Get real. But Susie can't go home without Kris and Ralsei's help, so after settling to join their side after getting jumped with kindness, the Fun Gang is now fully formed. And Lancer, he's there too. Soon after though, Lancer gets caught between a rock and a hard place. While he does really like his new friends, he's afraid of the outcome that might occur if they get into a fight with his dad. Something they have to do to seal the Dark Fountain, which is being protected by him. And when Lancer asks about it, Susie unknowingly confirms Lancer's fears, and he feels he has no other choice but to lock up the Lighteners so nobody gets hurt in the end. This leaves Susie betrayed, because this is the first person she's lowered her guard for in years, and he ended up turning on her. Which, while was for understandable reasons, she didn't learn those quite yet. So when she finally does encounter Lancer, it's heartbreaking. But after the fight, she admits she doesn't actually want to kill him. So just for Lancer, she agrees to let Kris, or more accurately, the player, tell her what to do in hopes that everyone can be happy in the end. Then of course, after the fight, Susie lets out that she now views these other characters as her friends, and when it's all said and done, with her hand on Kris's shoulder, asks to come back to the Dark World tomorrow. And that concludes Susie's character arc and her character growth in Deltarune so far, going from someone who belittles others to help cope with her own situations, to becoming someone who openly cares for others and is slightly more emotionally intelligent. Slightly. She drops a lot of her more destructive habits as well, like when a similar circumstance to Susie and Lancer's fight happens between Susie and Ralsei. She doesn't ever physically attack, and doesn't let her fear of betrayal get the better of the situation. While she still lashes out, it's understandable given how Ralsei's seclusiveness led to Susie and Kris being misled into having to fight this fucking thing. And I'm going a little bit off script here, but I also want to bring up how Ralsei tells Susie that he's a Darkener, and that he isn't real, and that she should go get better friends. If you go talk to Susie later on in chapter 3, she discusses how much she actually cares for Ralsei, and how she doesn't care if he's real or not, because Ralsei feels real to her, and I think that's also a really important character moment as well. So then what's going on with Ralsei? Ralsei is someone trying his hardest to be a one-dimensional character, but just can't seem to pull it off right. He tells Kris and Susie the prophecy in chapter 1, but purposely excludes a lot of details and worry that they'll want to back out if they knew everything that was going to happen. He also knows that their friendship is important, so he tries to be as friendly as possible to maximize the chances of these characters liking him. This philosophy is also shown in the way he convinces the player to show mercy to every enemy they face. He hopes that if they be kind to everyone, things might actually have a happy ending. Otherwise, we might not find the result favorable. Sorry, that was my best Ralsei impression. It's the relationship between Ralsei and the prophecy that shows his growth and personality, as well as some of the really depressing revelations in the game. Ralsei is aware that the player and Kris are separate entities. I mean, he has to. If he knows so much about the prophecy, then surely he knows that Kris is a cage with a human soul in parts, keeping the player inside. Which is why there are several moments where Ralsei is trying to distract the player towards something else so they can talk to Kris without the player seeing. Something we know can happen, because at the end of the weird route in chapter 2, it's confirmed by Noelle that when Kris throws the soul under the sink and jumps out the window, they are trying to fix every awful thing we did, bringing Birdley to the hospital and telling Noelle that everything was just a prank. And obviously Kris's panic that ensues afterwards supports this, because they know that we're now learning about all of this. So what is Ralsei trying to tell Kris in these scenes? Well, we don't know. But he does this a lot, and in chapter 4, he tries to use this to go ahead and scout out the area for any more revealing parts of the prophecy. Ralsei knows what happens in the prophecy, and that's his arc. He doesn't value himself as an individual. He doesn't take the time to invest in anything people normally do with their lives, such as learning a new hobby or learning a new interest. That's why his room is so empty in chapter 4, unless you gave him the plush. Really ties the whole thing together. But aside from that, what's the point of filling it when you know what's going to happen? But Kris and Susie, they don't know yet what's going to happen. They push him to live a little, to show that there's still more to life than the prophecy. And it works really well. In chapter 3, he even scolds himself for forgetting there was a fountain that needed to be sealed. And in chapter 4, you can tell Ralsei that he matters, that it's okay to feel emotions and serve yourself sometimes. But Ralsei, he's still a little different. He wants to protect everyone to his own detriment. He wants to shield everyone from just about any pain he can get in the way of. The pain of knowledge, the pain of isolation, or the pain from the night. While I'm sure a lot of people also had strong emotional reactions to this scene, again, I couldn't understand why this moment worked so well for me, why it caught me off guard and sucker punched me. But I think I have the answer. This scene is the culmination of these characters' arcs. While yes, there is still plenty more room for them to grow, and I'm certain they will, this scene acts as the sun setting on the struggles of themselves, of their own personal conflicts. This is your reward for investing in the story, for caring about these characters, helping you push on and throwing themselves right in harm's way. This is a scene that is bookmarking the relationships between the characters and the player, with all 4 main characters all contributing. Kris leading the way, Susie and Ralsei taking hits for Kris, and the player lighting the way. I just want to stop right here for a second and talk about something. Notice how I said the relationship between the characters and the player, and not the relationships between the characters and Kris. Let's discuss Kris. Kris also has their own character arc, but instead of it being seen since chapter 1, it starts at chapter 4, or at least it really takes off in chapter 4. And we have no idea where this is going to head, but let's talk about everything we know so far. Kris fucking hates you! Kris doesn't want anything to do with you, but due to working with Carol, they're kinda stuck with you. They need you to seal the fountains, something Kris alone cannot do. But in the same way, there are things only Kris can do that you cannot, such as playing the piano. If this tells me anything, I believe the story arc of Kris and the player will likely be what the back half of Deltarune will lean more towards. Kris and the player leaning towards each other's strengths and learning to get along to work together. Unless you're in the weird route. But there are still caveats to my theory, such as the player having to traumatize Kris in order to get the eggs and defeat the secret bosses. Clearly, what we put them through in these dark worlds really messes them up, which is likely why Kris begins to retaliate in chapter 4 by locking you up and just enjoying time to themselves. Notice how at first Kris just wants to enjoy being in control again. They pour themselves a glass of chocolate milk and play the piano, something they have not been able to do. That is until they tell on Susie getting the guitar and ruining the awesome lesbian moment. Wait! Two characters who clearly have feelings for each other, but events always getting in the way. Their love never comes to fruition, and everything will ultimately end in tragedy. Oh my god. Deltarune is a doomed Yuri! But you can begin to see how Kris and the player begin sharing control in this same chapter. Like right here when Kris plays the piano, which is a separately powerful moment in and of itself, but this video is already so much sidetracking. And again, this culminates in this scene too, with the soul, the player, shining a light in the darkness, and Kris having to protect that soul. And while I did say the game was about the relationship between the characters and the player, Kris can show several times in the game that they care about these characters too. If you try to tell Ralsei in chapter 4 that it isn't okay to feel what he does, Kris will cough to try to cover it up, leading to Ralsei believing that they said it was okay instead. Also, these moments. Oh my god. Oh my god! We're gonna manipulate this bitch. Hell yeah! So I'm sure Kris is feeling everything the other characters are feeling in this scene too. God, it's so good. This is Deltarune. This moment perfectly depicts so many themes of Deltarune. The connections the characters have to each other, growing, changing, facing adversity, and just being kind to people. I relate a lot to the personal circumstances that these characters can go through. I can relate to feeling isolated. I can relate to not feeling worthy enough to serve myself, and I can relate to feeling like I don't have control over my life. But this moment says, yes, it's hard. Yes, it won't always be easy, but you can get through. You can find people that will help you. People that will say, I'm with you in the dark. Kris? What the fuck? Hi, thank you so much for watching. I just want to give a special shout out to my channel members. Elizabeth's Musical, Thorn776, Graham, Ariella the Freak, Hyphen, Grima, and Alan Baez Dither. Thank you.